group's problem. I think the problem is that there is a global imperialist complicity, and the thing is that there is, and especially in the light of what happened in Gaza, what happened in Palestine, that we all saw the kind of live stream genocide that went on for 2 years uninterrupted. We understood that this global imperialist framework, it operates in order to erode any kind of democracy, erode any kind of democratic rights, and that all of these growing anti-imperialist tensions are also meant with very anti-democratic measures, like the clampdown on protest, the clampdown on speech. And also we have for once in a while, for what was necessarily relegated to far left circles in terms of understanding imperialism. Okay, imperialism, that's a very Maoist terminology, anti-imperialism is a Maoist terminology. There was this idea that somehow it was a Maoist conception that has been broken, or the fact that it was a national liberation struggle. Okay, the entity is worried about this, the Maoists are worried about it. I think that has been shattered. After Gaza, that has absolutely been shattered, and you understand that imperialism is also a monster that you have to fight, because all of Western imperialism's pretension that they were doing things because they were opposed to China, they were opposed to Russia, they were opposed to Iran, it fell because, it showed you the support for a genocide in Gaza. So, and once again with Gaza, we have to go back and think, what was India's role in it? What's connection with, India and Israel? And why is the West, which talks about other things, continue to only look at India as a back office or as a market? Is there anything else that it's worried about? Is that why they turn a complete blind eye? If they're already turning a blind eye to Gaza, they're naturally going to turn a blind eye to whatever human rights abuses that happen in India. And then again, when you look at what is happening around the world, you're also realizing, especially with the rise of Trump and the rise of the far right across Europe, you also realize that all of these fascist movements, whether in India, Europe or America, are also tied with this core ideology where Islamophobia is a very unifying force, and there can be no other way of putting it. And there's also, this again comes with its own brand of anti-migrant rhetoric. There's an attack on women's rights, on women's reproductive rights, and also the weaponization of nationalism. So, and the material base of what is happening here again is that even if capitalism is the foundational enabler, there's a lot of economic anxiety that is allowed to channel this kind of hate, and which makes people, push for greater austerity, greater, measures. And at the end of all of this whole, okay, things are happening in the US, things are happening in America, they're slapping tariffs and all of this. But at the heart of it, again comes back to how does it concern us as Indians, If they are bombing Gaza, how does it concern us? And I think it actually concerns us because this issue of land grab is not just happening there. This issue of extractive capitalism is already coming to us. It's already there in Bastar. It's already there in a lot of places where they want to do the mining. But also this capitalist accusation of agricultural land, how much are we worried about it? The idea of privatization and commodification of water, the fact that there's so much mining happening, especially only in the global south, and the kind of repression that's faced when you oppose it. And we see this happen unfold in Bastar. We find in Bastar, for instance, this date for Operation Kagar, and saying that by March 2026 that all of quote-unquote Naxalism will be eliminated. And we have to understand that all of this is tied up in so many ways, and where are the writers? So there's so many protests, there's so many problems, there's so much going on, and then the big question is, but where are the writers? And for me this is a big question, because this should be a question that we are speaking at literature festivals. We've never before lived in India, and we never had so many literature festivals before. So every city has a festival. Some cities have 4 or 5 festivals, and like October, November, the weather starts getting better, and then you have like every single festival starts happening. But these are not things that get articulated there. These questions, these very urgent, pressing questions of our time, don't get tied up to writing. They don't get tied up in literary discourse, and therefore the literary discourse, this kind of discourse, is relegated to what is again left, or what's seen as far left. And this is the big dissonance, that how do you operate as a writer, and how do you make sure that this is something that every other writer is talking about? Because it's not like, okay, I have like personally leased out and said, okay, Kandasamy is going to talk about all these issues, others can talk about nicer issues, because no, it's not like that. So, and I think that's the big tragedy in front of us. And here I actually want to talk about just as I pointed out this glaring paradox that never have we had more festivals and never have we had less freedom or less space or to articulate, Bastar, or the clampdown on rights, the whatever oppression is happening, the people being sent to jail for blog post, for writing on X, all of these things. And I think that there is something that we really have to call out or sit with ourselves and understand that, if a writer is a watchman, sorry to use a very everyday word, but if you are an alert person, if you're somebody who is like, okay, something's happening, I have to be alert, just that state of alertness. The thing is that we have failed as an intellectual class. It's one thing, it's one thing after the act to go and analyze it. I mean, that we are going to produce some of the greatest intellectuals in the world 20 years later who tell us what went wrong. But what are we doing in the here and now? And I think this is again where Sai's life is like, he was not just, a professor, he was not just a writer, he was also somebody who was trying his best to work with civil society, with people's groups, with people's movements. And he's the extreme example that can show what actually is wrong with all of us. And here I think that especially somebody who also comes from the progressive South, which I think is a very loaded word, the idea of the progressive South, because I think what has happened in the South, and especially someone coming from Tamil Nadu, which is everybody's favorite model state, everybody's best example of an advertising state, everybody's best advertisement model, is that you have an absolute illusion of freedom, right? You're like, oh, writers are so free, writers are this, writers are that. And I think that there's something about this liberal secular trap, that artistic establishment falls into this absolute trap, and so you can selectively outrage. People are fine if you outrage about a few things. You can, but there are few things that you just cannot talk about. And I think this illusion of freedom to express, this idea that, oh no, we are a social justice model, and on the one hand you sell this brand of social justice, but on the other hand, sanitary workers who are fighting on the streets, their jobs were absolutely privatized, and it's very interesting. For instance, you go back to 1905 and you read the Madras Census, and the Madras Census tells you that the British decide that because the city has to be safe from diseases, they decide to make all the conservancy staff permanent workers of the government. And so this happens during the British period. And then who is it who comes and privatizes 10,000 workers of the Chennai Corporation? It is our dear Chief Minister Stalin. And this he does it when he's mayor, and now again the privatization is happening, and conservancy workers, sanitation workers who are protesting are, arrested in the midnight, they're being brutally beaten up by the police. And then you manage the media so well, and everyone has understood from Modi how to manage media, and you manage the media so well, and the story never comes out. You never realize that, there is a huge problem, that workers cannot protest. And how do they manage the media? And this is again where writers fail. They manage the media by saying the conservancy workers took out a protest, took out a march to thank the CM for agreeing to give them food 3 times a day. But that was not even a demand of the protest. That was not what the protest was all about. But this absolute PR spin, absolute media spin, and then you realize this is happening in front of your eyes. And the problem again is, I think in India we have this, and we have to call this out, is that we are fine with everything up to the point of secularism. That we think that as long as capitalism wants to do whatever it wants, but it's capitalism with the secular phase, we are going to be fine. But there is a problem there, because capitalism with the secular phase is still going to end up as extractive capitalism, it's going to end up as exploitative capitalism, it's going to end up as capitalism with nepotism, capitalism with dynasty plus. And then this capitalism is going to pave the way for a fast-track fascism. It's going to make the way for people to say, okay, there are no options, everybody is a fraud, therefore we are going to the far right. And this is something we are not talking about. Across Europe this happened. How did